Episode 2 of what essentially amounts to the Loki and Mobius show is deeply fascinating and really does a lot with the concept that they've presented of multiple timelines, how the TVA works, what they detect in order to do their job to go in and essentially prune. I kept wondering why they kept using that word, but it's just like because they're pruning branches. Like, no shit, dude. But they prune or, erase any kind of variances and essentially wipe it from the timeline. They treat it as though they're just correcting a mistake, but Loki, I feel he calls it for what it is, because he's studying up on all the functionalities of the TVA. Oddly enough, with Miss Minutes, who, as it turns out, isn't just a mascot, it seems to be a sentient program, more or less. So, dude, more Tara Strong voice acting? Yes, please. I'm all for that. But Loki is basically an intern for the most part for Mobius and Mobius. But at the same time, he's also kind of treated like a guy on parole. He's only given so much in terms of the scope of what he's allowed to do. And the Loki variant, weirdly enough, the Loki variant seems to have this ability to possess people, oddly enough, which isn't unheard of, because that was kind of Loki's MO during the first Avengers movie. But this Loki variant is doing it without the use of an Infinity Stone or even the staff that was gifted by Thanos. So I'm under the question, is Loki always able to do this? Is this a Loki who just... Is our Loki just the Loki who wasn't able to learn this skill? Because as the TVA task force is kind of studying up on various different forms of Loki, they're just like, okay, we've dealt with multiple Lokis before. So this isn't an isolated incident. And this also helps to elaborate on why so many members of the TVA are so against working with Loki, because every variant of Loki is up to mischief. He's up to no good in the end. There's always an angle, there's always something he's doing. However, Mobius is trying to take a chance on this Loki because I feel that, and he's not saying this out loud, this is one of the most crafty versions of Loki they've had. But everyone around Mobius is telling them, hey, don't do this, don't take a chance on this guy, we should just prune him and be done with it. But Mobius feels that with this Loki, they might actually be onto something. They might actually be able to figure something out. Even really going to bat for Loki to Ravonna Renslayer, who is, basically his boss for the most part. I'm wondering if she will have any connection to Kang the Conqueror at any point in the future, mostly because, she's his wife in other variants and stuff like that. So I'm wondering if that will ever come to pass. I really am wondering if ultimately we're going to find out that the timekeepers don't even actually exist, that this is all a plan by Kang the Conqueror in order to ensure his own destined timeline of being a conqueror. I wouldn't be surprised if that was kind of the rub at some point, but at the same time, it kind of brings forth the question, is Marvel actually going to go in a more complex direction? Because they tend to kind of keep things pretty standard in terms of a lot of things. But my favorite part of all of this is when Loki is studying up on the variant, because after they previously tried to track it down, Loki tried to pull some shit, he was called out on it, and Mobius is kind of in hot water because of that, because people are starting to think, okay, this Loki variant is trying to waste our time and is trying to find a means of escape. But Loki actually puts in the work and starts to connect the dots. And something that's very fascinating, and I love the way that the moment they started to go in this direction, I immediately knew the angle. Because with the way that the TVA operates, once there is a variance, a shift in the timeline, they go in, they take care of it. And what they've been looking for is any kind of moments within the timeline where things shift, they go in and check it out, they may end up finding the Loki variant, but unfortunately a lot of the Minutemen end up dying in the process. Loki figures it out that a lot of the places that the Loki variant has actually been found were places where there were no alterations to the timeline in any way, shape, or form. And Loki starts to put it together because of the casualties in there. Like, so many people died, but there was no variance, no divergence in the timeline. This Loki is hiding out in apocalypses. Like Ragnarok, Pompeii, massive disasters where millions, well, thousands of people end up dying, but because so many people were supposed to die, so much destruction was supposed to happen, it doesn't come up on the TVA's sacred timeline because everything basically still happens according to plan. And I love the way Loki gets Mobius to kind of check it out with him. Yes, he makes a very convincing argument to Mobius, which again I followed it completely, and I'm just like, damn, you did all this setup in episode 1, and thanks to that, once you got to episode 2, I'm just like, wow, I actually followed that completely. Maybe it's just because I read so many comic books, but I completely followed the train of logic. It's just like, yeah, that would happen because everyone dies, so many people dies, there's no possibility of any kind of variance because nothing the Loki would do would matter because everyone there dies. And so Loki and Mobius head to Pompeii. Loki causes this massive ruckus, and Mobius notices there's no branching of the timeline. None whatsoever. It's just like, completely proves the point. So he really goes to bat for Loki to Ravonna Renslayer. It's just like, we got this. Give me a task force, we'll go in. We have this one place in 2050, Roxxon, of course, freaking Roxxon, Jesus. The big business that is Roxxon. There's always some kind of problem here, but apparently in 2050 there's this massive storm at a Roxcart facility, which is basically a massive superstore Walmart kind of place. And they feel that it's a big enough disaster and enough people end up dying in the storm that it's a great place for the Loki variants to hide out because it's a store as well. There's food, there's everything this Loki variant could need. So they go in. Mobius ends up being separated from Loki by the one hunter who's, I'm not even sure what their name was. The big old black lady, basically. Loki ends up going with her because she wants to personally keep an eye on Loki. So they head off, much to the dismay of Mobius, who wanted to really keep an eye on this Loki. They end up finding one of the Minutemen who had been kidnapped by the female Loki. And this Minuteman is just completely freaked out, says, I gave away the location of the timekeepers. How that works, I'm not really sure. How do you give away a location? How do you figure that all out? But, Loki ends up running into the variants when it ends up possessing the one agent that he's with. And this Loki just is shifting from person to person until he basically gets into a big enough person to beat Loki's ass. But they have a very fascinating conversation where the Loki variant is giving our Loki the runaround for the most part. Kind of Loki's getting a taste of his own medicine of, you're constantly playing angles and all that, talking things up, biding your time. There's always an angle with Loki, and the variants really shows there's an angle with this Loki as well. And meanwhile, our Loki, he's desperately trying to make it seem like he infiltrated the TVA from the inside. He tries to team up with the Loki variant in order to basically overthrow the timekeepers, which is pretty obvious that was going to be his goal in some way, shape, or form, because he wants the ultimate power of the TVA. Power that makes the Infinity Stone seem pointless and pedantic. Of course he wants that, all for himself. But ultimately the Loki variant isn't buying what our Loki is selling, and starts to beat his ass with a big burly old dude, one of them good old boys. And we end up having it revealed that this Loki variant is apparently a female? And it's hard to tell what they're kind of going for. I'm actually kind of disappointed that the female Loki doesn't have black hair. It's just like, the black hair really does it. But it's a female Loki, blonde hair and all that. Kind of makes me think, just like, is this supposed to be like the Enchantress, maybe? A student of Loki? It's really hard to tell because I'm really wondering what the angle here is with having it be a female Loki. Is it just a version of Loki who was from a gender-bent world or something like that? Or is there more to it than that? Knowing how Marvel, the MCU, kind of does things, wouldn't be surprised if it's just a female variant of Loki, but you never know. They might go a little bit further with it. But this Loki, the variant Loki, has just been assembling all these reset charges and has basically created these series of time bombs, reset charges, and simultaneously just releases them all in the timeline, creating massive chaos for the TVA. So all the Minutemen and even Ravonna are just scrambling to take care of all this shit. So I think it's a distraction, create enough conflict within the timeline, chaos and all of that. That way so many of the Minutemen have to scramble out of the TVA. The Loki variant, the female Loki variant, can go into the TVA, hunt down the timekeepers, and maybe even overthrow them? Or is this female Loki variant up to something else? Like, why do all of this? Is it simply to avoid being erased? Or is there something deeper going on here? So I'm really kind of digging this. It's just like, there's a mystery, there's the weirdness of the timelines, you can go anywhere, there's so much room for possibility when it comes to all of this. There's so much you can really do with this setup and this premise. So I'm really hoping that this series can stick the landing. Make me care about the female Loki variant. Our Loki, will he end up being erased at the end of all this? Because that's ultimately the question. Will he end up being erased at the end of all of this? Will he manage to survive past the ending of this series? Because this Loki's destiny isn't assured. I mean, it wraps up the loose end of what happened to the Loki variant that escaped from 2012, but, will he end up mattering in the grand scheme of things? You can really do a lot with this character because Loki is supposed to be dead. This is a variant. He's not supposed to exist for the most part. So you can really play around with what you do with this Loki. And I really am digging it. Because one of the most fun things about Loki, especially in the comics, is because you can have so many multiple versions of Loki just running around causing chaos and pandemonium. And one of my favorite Loki storylines is when a Loki from the future, King Loki, goes throughout time and just starts fucking with shit and causing trouble for the standard 616 Loki. Although technically that wasn't even the standard 616 Loki, that was a variant called Equal, and it's already variants of Loki mucking around. So it's always a fun thing. And when you're going to make a really devious enemy for Loki, might as well make it Loki. But this show is really selling me so far. I'm really digging it. I just really hope they can keep up this momentum, because sometimes within the midpoint of a series, it can sometimes drag a little bit, and sometimes the ending doesn't quite stick the landing. It's just like, yeah, it's okay, but it feels like he could have done so much more. So I'm not trying to get my hopes up too high on what they choose to do with all of this, because Kevin Feige, he likes to keep things kind of simple to a certain degree, even when it comes to the comic book nonsense, more or less. So I'm just interested to see where they go, because there is a lot of wiggle room with what you can do with this premise. But don't just take it from me. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you like this video or feel that any of my thoughts are warranted, my theories on how this might go, that ultimately this Loki variant might just end up sacrificing himself in the end. Because ultimately Loki's supposed to be dead, so there's a wide array of possibilities. But let me know your thoughts and theories in the comment section below. If you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, bell, all that good stuff. Or don't. I ain't your daddy, but I still love you like one. And until next time, I've been Duuz-Diz-Din, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.